Well, good morning, everyone. I'm United States Magistrate Judge Bob Numbers of the Eastern District of North Carolina, and it's my pleasure to welcome all of you to the second annual Federalist Society North Carolina Chapters Conference. It is wonderful to see so many people here today. We have over 160 lawyers, judges, justices, and elected officials and lay people here today. For the second consecutive year, this event is sold out. And that fact is a testament to the strength of the Federalist Society in North Carolina and the commitment that all of you have shown to this organization. During today's conference, we're going to be covering a broad array of topics. We're going to begin with remembrances of two North Carolinians who were integral to the Federalist Society's growth, both in North Carolina and across the country, Ambassador C. Boyden Gray and Charlotte Attorney Jim Sullivan. We'll then move on to a panel discussion about North Carolina's administrative state, moderated by Justice Richard Dietz. Panelists will provide an overview of how North Carolina's administrative agencies work and their implications for the separation of powers and individual liberty. After that, we'll enjoy a conversation between the Honorable Amul Thapar, Judge of the United States Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit, the Honorable Thomas D. Schroeder, United States Magistrate Judge for the Middle District of North Carolina, and the Honorable Susan Rodriguez, United States Magistrate Judge for the Western District of North Carolina. They will discuss Judge Thapar's recent book, The People's Justice, Clarence Thomas and the Constitutional Stories That Define Him, and an array of other topics. We'll then have a discussion about the current state of the legal culture in North Carolina, moderated by Justice Trey Allen. That panel will discuss navigating the legal community and law school in North Carolina as conservatives. The panel members will draw on their own experiences from firms, law school, and daily practice. After that, we'll hear from Senator Phil Berger, the President Pro Tem of the North Carolina Senate. He'll be interviewed by Ashley Honeycutt-Terrazas, the Chair of the Triangle Lawyers Chapter. They'll discuss his experiences in the North Carolina Senate and the future of North Carolina. And finally, we'll have a panel on the Supreme Court of North Carolina. Panelists will offer their diverse perspectives on the current state of the North Carolina Supreme Court, the issues it's facing, its potential docket, and emerging legal controversies that will affect the future of the court and our state. I want to point out these events don't come together without a lot of work from a dedicated group of volunteers. For the last several months, Federalist Society members from across the state have been working diligently to make today's event happen. Many of them are here in the room today. I'd like to ask them to stand so they can be briefly recognized for their work. We've also had a substantial amount of assistance from the Federalist Society's national office. Lisa Ezel, the Federalist Society's Vice President for the Lawyers Division, and her able deputies, Hannah Kunesic and Abby Kepto, have been involved in many of the details that will make today's event enjoyable, and they're owed a debt of thanks as well. And we also have a number of law students who have taken their Friday to be here today and assist us. I'd encourage you, they have I believe, purple lapel labels. I'd encourage you to meet them, introduce yourselves to them so that they can help build relationships here in the Federalist Society community. Before we get on to today's events, I want to leave you with a few final thoughts. Two of the Federalist Society's strengths are its commitment to the open debate of ideas and the ability to foster relationships between its members. This conference has the first item covered. Each panel will provide an array of viewpoints on various topics. But the second part, building relationships, is up to all of you. There are undoubtedly people here today that you do not know or do not know well. But all of you share an interest in the issues that the Federalist Society focuses on. I encourage each of you to get to know the other attendees, particularly those from areas of the state that are different from yours. I'd also encourage you to meet the leaders of the Triangle, Cape Fear, and Charlotte Lawyers chapters who are here today. They have a flag on their name tag denoting that they're a member of leadership. I'm sure they'd welcome the opportunity to meet you, hear your ideas for future events, and involve you in the planning and execution of those events. Finally, a reminder for those of you who are seeking CLE credit for attending today. To get credit, you must sign in using the QR code on the back of your program. there's a digital timestamp, so you need to sign in before the panels begin. So now would be a good time to do that. If you don't sign in on time, you may not receive credit for being here today. You should also use the same QR code to sign out when you leave the conference later today. With those matters out of the way, we can move forward to the business of the conference. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to begin with remembrances of two North Carolinians who were integral to the Federalist Society's success over the course of many years. To begin with, we're going to hear remarks from Liberman Otis and Senior United States District Judge Richard Voorhees about Ambassador C. Boyden Gray. While these two speakers need no introduction to the people in this room, I'll give them a brief one anyway. Liberman Otis is the Senior Vice President and Faculty Division Director of the Federalist Society. Together with David McIntosh, she led the effort to start what became the Chicago chapter of the Society. She also helped organize the Society's first conference at Yale, its second conference at Chicago, and its first Lawyers Division chapter in Washington, D.C. In addition, she helped incorporate the Society, recruit its permanent staff, and obtain its early funding. Beyond her work with the Federalist Society, she served as a law clerk to the late Justice Antonin Scalia, associate counsel to President George H.W. Bush, and held numerous positions in government, the private sector, and the academy. Senior United States District Judge Richard Voorhees is a judge in the United States District Court for the Western District of North Carolina. He's a graduate of Davidson College and the University of North Carolina School of Law. He served in the United States Army and practiced in Gastonia, North Carolina. In 1987, President Ronald Reagan nominated Judge Voorhees to fill the seat previously held by Judge David B. Sentell, who we'll hear more about later today. Judge Voorhees was confirmed to the bench in 1988. He served as Chief Judge of the Western District from 1991 until 1998 and took senior status in 2017. With that out of the way, I'll welcome Lee Otis to the podium.
Thanks so much, Bob. I'm delighted to be here today. This is actually the first event in North Carolina that I think I've attended in the Federalist Society, and it's wonderful to be here. And I am so happy to have the opportunity to say something about Boyden, to whom I owe an awful lot, as will become clear in this research triangle, which was such an important part of his life. Boyden grew up in Chapel Hill, of course, where his father was president of the University of North Carolina. And that has something to do with how I met my husband, actually, who is here today as well. Basically, we were being deluged in the White House counsel's office, where I was working with Boyden at the end of President George H.W. Bush's term, with subpoenas and document requests and so on from various independent counsels and congressional committees who thought that it was far better for us to be spending time responding to their demands than doing anything constructive. So we basically decided that we needed some help from somebody who knew more about these than we did, and we ended up recruiting my husband, my now husband, from the Justice Department, who it turned out, whose uncle it turned out had been Boyden's pediatrician. So I'm very grateful to Boyden for that. in terms of Boyden, it's very difficult to capture everything about anybody, of course, and Boyden is particularly difficult to capture, I think, in some ways. The Washington Post said many things about him that were, not entirely true or not entirely flattering. But one thing they were right about is that he marched to his own drummer. He is, after all, the guy who was counsel to President Bush, clerked for Earl Warren, and championed Clarence Thomas for the Supreme Court, and stood with him through thick and thin. He also is the guy who scandalized Rosa Maria, who was in charge of White House decorum, by bringing his pot-bellied pig into the White House one Saturday afternoon when he was working on various matters, and had actually left the office to go to meet with somebody. And when Rosa Maria walked in and saw this pot-bellied pig sitting on the couch of the counsel to the president, and was so astonished by this phenomenon and so horrified that she just walked out without a word. He was also, of course, the man who was passionate about clean air and about emissions, reducing emissions, but was also profoundly skeptical about certain governmental interventions, thinking correctly that they tended to result in capture by special interests. No staff meeting was complete without his inveighing against ethanol, for example. At the same time, he was responsible, more than most people for the adoption of the Clean Air Act of amendments of 1990, which were harnessed market forces through the cap and trade system to reduce emissions far more successfully than any other environmental initiative has done before or since. Of course, he was passionate about opportunities for Black children, and was an ardent supporter of school choice, an ardent supporter of charter schools, an ardent supporter of vouchers, while at the same time an ardent opponent of racial preferences, and which he thought were demeaning, and it's too bad that he didn't live to see the Supreme Court's decision in SFFA, in which his law firm, the law firm that he founded, Boyden Gray & Associates, played an important role. Finally, I guess, of course, we know him best through his role in appointing conservative judges and justices to the federal bench. Not only, of course, Clarence Thomas to the Supreme Court, but many Court of Appeals and District Court judges. And we owe him an enormous debt of gratitude for that. Last of all, I guess I will say that Boyden was really a patriot and a gentleman. He loved the United States, and he served it both in the military and, of course, during his time in the government. And he was just an extraordinary public servant. Both during his time in government and after, actually, and he was a true gentleman. He really was the person who would find the least important person in the room and go talk to them and make sure that they felt included and welcome It's just, it was a privilege to have the opportunity to work for him, and it's a privilege to remember him here with you today.
Thank you, Robert, for that kind introduction, and thank you, Lee, for introducing our honorees and tributee today. And it's delightful for me also, especially to be here with all of you in honoring the principles for which we stand, and also some individuals who have meant a great deal to conservative and good government. In this instance, I would mention that I'm going to truncate my remarks a little bit because of Lee's able statements. In any event, Lee left us at 80 back in May and resided in his mostly his working career. He had a house on the corner in Georgetown, Washington, D.C. For some 40 years, where he often entertained people. And that was one of the ways he came to be known. You might know that after he passed away, there was an avalanche of coverage in all of the important newspapers. And typically, it was different in different accounts. And that was owing to the fact that the authors who were actually committing journalism, as has been said by someone else, accounted things they knew about him because they did know Boyden from his long career in Washington. Boyden and I grew up in Winston-Salem in early years, and his family was among the most prominent and well-known and well-respected in Winston and nationally. Later, we became classmates at UNC Law, and in 1968 was our graduation class, and the dean was Dean Dixon Phillips, who was later tapped for a seat on the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals. Now, Boyden was among the most illustrious of our classmates, a group which included, for example, Susan Eringhouse, for whom I believe, that is, whose family name I think is born on a dormitory at Chapel Hill. She was one of the scholars at the top, and notably is all Dave Centel, and we'll hear more about that. In fact, I was on the telephone with Judge Centel recently to ask his recollections about Boyden. The two of them had been friends the whole time since law school. And recalling those days, Dave said Boyden could boast 3 superlatives as to our class. He was the smartest, the tallest, and the richest. So he had the best grades, was 6'6" in height, and his family was decidedly well-to-do and philanthropic in orientation. Now, going back to his great-grandfather and on down to Boyden, we see positions of leadership of Wachovia Bank, R.J. Reynolds Tobacco Company, UNC Chapel Hill, and other legacies such as Gray High School, Bowman Gray Stadium, Bowman Gray School of Medicine, and the Grayland Estate property now owned by Wake Forest University. And by the way, if you happen to need a room in Winston-Salem at some point, you are welcome to call them up and stay at the Grayland Estate. I understand it's a wonderful experience. Now then, to the immense benefit of our republic, Boyden Gray never rested on his laurels, particularly not those of his accomplished forebears, but rather put together his keen intellect, his tireless focus on the task at hand, his ability to untangle thickets in the law, and great skill in communicating with people in responsible positions. Now, Judge Centel recalled his last visit with Boyden, saying this: when he called me to have dinner at his home and sent a car to get me, I I thought he wanted me to do something. When I got there and saw the condition he was in, I realized he wanted to spend the evening reminiscing with an old friend because the end was near. As has been said, you can't make new old friends. His passing was not a shock, said Judge Centel, but it is certainly a loss. He was an intellectual giant of the law. Now, all of you are familiar with William Barr, whose formal jobs included Attorney General and White House counsel under several presidents. His long involvement with legal affairs in Washington is recounted in his very aptly titled book, One Damn Thing After Another, which I heartily recommend to all of you. Any lawyer would find it a fast and rewarding read. But after some autobiography, he dives right into the fray, and Bill Barr writes these words: "The most fateful aspect of my brief stint in the Reagan White House was my getting to know Vice President Bush's counsel, Boyden Gray, a talented, seasoned lawyer and a joy to work with." In the ensuing some 500 pages of what Barr calls encounters with a potpourri of legal and conservative issues, we find Boyden Gray making his appearance in helping to solve numerous crises with all their legal conundrums and complexities. Boyden attended prep school at St. Mark's, and as you've heard, he was at Harvard, where he graduated magna cum laude, became a sergeant in the Marine Corps, editor of the North Carolina Law Review at Chapel Hill. He joined the firm of Wilmer, Cutler, and Pickering in 1976. I seem to remember the name Lloyd Cutler in frequent accounts. Becoming partner in 76, he also switched to Republican in 1976. Led the Office of Legal Counsel and so forth, as you've heard. He was known as a strategist, a meticulous lawyer, and a policy maven, especially in the fight against regulatory overreach. He founded a firm under his own name and founded the C. Boyden Gray Center for the Study of the Administrative State at the Antonin Scalia School of Law. Became ambassador to the European Union in 2006. There comes the title ambassador, special envoy for European affairs, and later special envoy for Eurasian energy. He was passionately supportive of transatlantic economic ties founded and rooted in principles of freedom and collaboration. So even at the time of his death, he was serving on the board of the Federalist Society. He came to Charlotte at some point and spoke to the assembled multitude there. But when he was done, he had about an hour before having to leave for the airplane. So he met with a group of us at the federal courthouse, a collection of people from all parts of our establishment. He was friendly, he was approachable, he was funny, he had a great wit. It was known that especially if somebody criticized him about something, he could come back with a retort that would have everybody howling. So that was part of the personality of someone who sometimes was thought of as a bit on the eccentric side, but nevertheless, nothing could overcome the respect people had for him. Now, Boyden was married for a short time. He leaves a daughter and 2 grandchildren. He was very nurturing of his family relationships. He had 2 brothers and many cousins as well. His first name, his full name, was Clayland, but he went by C. Boyden Gray, reportedly having said he didn't fancy being called Clay Gray. U.S. District Judge James Dever of our Eastern District wrote this in expressing his condolences. "Very sad indeed to lose a man of such brilliance and success in helping to set things right in Washington. Boyden was one of a kind and lived an extraordinary life. May his memory be a blessing to all who have known him, and may he rest in peace. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Wade Leach, and I'm an attorney with Burr, Forman, and Charlotte, and a part of our Charlotte steering committee for the Federalist Society. I have the privilege this morning of introducing our next speaker, who will be sharing some words in celebration of a dearly departed colleague from the Charlotte Federalist Society chapter, Mr. Jim Sullivan. United States Senior District Court Judge Robert J. Conrad graduated from Clemson University in 1980 as a star basketball player and later Hall of Famer, and graduated from the University of Virginia School of Law in 1983. Judge Conrad has led a life of distinguished public service for our state and our nation, serving as United States Attorney for the Western District of North Carolina and subsequently being appointed by President George W. Bush to the United States District Court for the Western District of North Carolina in 2005. Judge Conrad, if you listen long enough, will frequently use the phrase, live intentionally. And I can think of no better words that describe nearly perfectly Jim Sullivan's life and legacy within our Federalist Society chapter and within our Charlotte community more broadly. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome United States Senior District Court Judge Robert Conrad.
Whenever anybody references my now 40-plus-year-old basketball career, I have to remind people that I was the only ACC basketball player whose grade point average was higher than his points per game. I don't know how that gets you into the Hall of Fame. But I'm here to talk about my good friend, Jim Sullivan. And I'm honored to do that with his wife, Chris, present. And these words are about him, but for her. James Michael Sullivan passed away on June 24th, 2022, at age 67 after a courageous battle with colon cancer. He was born and raised in Bethesda, Maryland, and after graduating from Walt Whitman High School in May 1972, he pursued his college studies at Hillsdale College in Michigan, graduating summa cum laude in May 1975. Jim would become a lifelong advocate of the mission of Hillsdale College. He taught for a while in an inner-city vocational school, later worked for fun in Alaska and Montana. Eventually went to law school at Georgetown, where he graduated cum laude in May of 1979. His first job as an attorney was in the law department of Marriott Corporation. In early 1981, Jim joined the staff of Senator John East's subcommittee of the United States Senate Judiciary Committee. And in the summer of 1983, he moved on to be legislative counsel for the Civil Rights Division of the U.S. Department of Justice. From 1986 through 1988, Jim was an AUSA in the Eastern District of Virginia, where he worked on the legendary Pizza Connection case. When Thomas J. Ashcraft of happy memory became U.S. Attorney for the Western District of North Carolina in 1988, Jim, Judge Frank Whitney, and I were one of his first hires. I to the criminal division, and Jim to the civil division. I would joke with him that I had become a fighter pilot and he was the cargo pilot. Kidding aside, Jim would spend the next 32 years performing excellent legal work representing the United States in federal court civil litigation. Judge Whitney and I would assess Jim's fine work based upon our observations of him as a colleague, later as U.S. attorneys and judges of the Western District of North Carolina, where Jim regularly appeared before us. Most prominent of his many services to the legal community was Jim's membership and activity in the Federalist Society. He is known at the time of his death for being one of the most longest serving members of the local chapter and somebody who never missed a meeting. Jim identified fully in the FedSoc mission to promote the principles of freedom, separation of powers, and the duty of the judiciary to expound the law as written. He was passionate in his conservative beliefs. Jim was passionate, period. He was one of the most principled men I ever met. There was no doubt where he stood on matters of faith, public policy, law, Hillsdale College, the Federalist Society, or anything really. You never had to say to Jim, "Tell me what you really think." Yet coupled with this passionate conservatism was a kindness, a good humor, and concern for the other that was unmatched. There's simply no one who can name an enemy of Jim's. In this fractious, divided time, Jim walked among us with a smile, spoke words of encouragement, and even in his last days, his questions were always about you and others, not the difficulties he was confronting daily. His obituary said it most eloquently. Jim will be remembered by family and friends for his keen intelligence, unyielding integrity and honor, genuine goodness, fun-loving spirit, bright smile, and the great love and affection he felt for his family. In fact, it is impossible to memorialize Jim without mentioning two further things: his love for his family and his commitment to Jesus Christ. He was Chris's devoted husband for 37 years and an intentional father to Tim, Johnny, Julie, and Tiffany. Many are the Conrad children's memories of Friday night frenzies, pizza parties, and run walks around the track with the Sullivan crew. In matters of religion, Jim served his church, Westminster Presbyterian, and was a member of the same Bible study for over 20 years. His firm conviction in the reality of eternal life in heaven enabled him to fight his courageous battle against colon cancer with a serenity that sometimes left you speechless. It was his last and enduring witness to Christ and his church. G.K. Chesterton wrote these words of consolation at the passing of a family member. For real strength, I don't like the word comfort. For real peace, no human words are much good, except perhaps some of the unfathomable, unintelligible, unconquerable epigrams of the Bible. One such text was precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of one of his saints. Such was the passing of Jim Sullivan. Thank you.